If you ask anyone who lived through the 90s to name the biggest news event of the decade, almost all of them will point to the exact same moment. It was a slow-speed police chase down a Los Angeles freeway that brought the entire country to a standstill. The man inside that white Ford Bronco was O.J. Simpson, a massive football legend and Hollywood star. But in the summer of 1994, he became the primary target of a double homicide investigation that split America right down the middle. Everything began on the night of June 12, 1994. The authorities were dispatched to a condo in the wealthy Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. Outside the residence, police made a devastating discovery. They found the remains of his ex-wife, 35-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson, and her 25-year-old friend, a restaurant waiter named Ronald Goldman. Both victims had suffered fatal injuries from a sharp weapon. The crime scene was a tragedy, and local investigators quickly zeroed in on Simpson as their prime suspect, due to a history of domestic disputes and a long trail of physical evidence. Just 5 days later, on June 17, 1994, prosecutors officially charged Simpson with 2 counts of murder. He was scheduled to turn himself in that morning, but instead, he vanished. Hours later, police spotted him riding in the back of a white Ford Bronco, driven by his former teammate Al Cowlings. What followed was a surreal 60-mile pursuit across the highways of Southern California. An estimated 95 million people watched live on television as dozens of police cars trailed the Bronco. It finally ended with Simpson surrendering in the driveway of his own mansion. The legal battle kicked off in January 1995, earning the popular title of the Trial of the Century. Because the evidence was so highly scrutinized, federal resources were brought in to help the local police. The prosecution laid out a massive amount of evidence. They utilized DNA testing, which was still a relatively new science at the time, showing blood from Simpson at the crime scene and the victim's blood inside his vehicle. They even brought in FBI Special Agent William Bodziak, an expert in footwear impressions, to testify that the bloody footprints at the scene belonged to a rare pair of size 12 Bruno Magli shoes, the exact expensive brand that Simpson was known to wear. The FBI crime lab also analyzed blood samples to check for chemical preservatives, trying to prove the evidence was not planted by corrupt detectives. On the other side, Simpson hired a powerful defense group known as the Dream Team, led by lawyers Johnny Cochran and Robert Shapiro. They aggressively attacked the police department, accusing detectives of mishandling the evidence and framing their client. The most famous moment of the entire trial happened when the prosecution asked Simpson to try on a bloody leather glove found at the crime scene. He struggled to pull it over his hand, prompting Johnny Cochran to deliver the famous line to the jury, stating that, "If it does not fit, you must acquit." After 8 months of exhausting courtroom drama, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. On October 3, 1995, they delivered a verdict of not guilty on both murder charges. The reaction across the United States was deeply divided, but Simpson walked out of the courtroom a free man. However, his legal troubles were far from over. In 1997, the families of the victims took him back to court in a civil trial. This time, the jury found him liable for the wrongful deaths and ordered him to pay $33 million in damages. Years later, his luck ran out in a different city. In September 2007, Simpson led a group of men into a Las Vegas hotel room to steal sports memorabilia at gunpoint. He was arrested, and in 2008, a judge sentenced him to 33 years in prison. He ended up serving 9 years behind bars before being granted parole in 2017. He lived out his final years quietly in Nevada until April 10, 2024, when he passed away from cancer at the age of 76. To this day, the 1994 investigation remains one of the most heavily debated cases in American history. Before the tragic morning of April 19, 1995, America had never really experienced domestic terrorism on such a massive scale. But just past 9 in the morning, everything changed in Oklahoma City. A massive explosion ripped through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, tearing off the entire north side of the 9-story structure. The blast was so powerful it shattered glass in over 300 nearby buildings and could be felt miles away. When the dust finally settled, 168 people lost their lives, while over 680 others were severely injured. First responders and regular citizens rushed to the scene from all over the city, digging through concrete and steel with their bare hands in a desperate attempt to pull survivors from the wreckage. The FBI immediately launched the largest criminal investigation in American history up to that point. Agents sifting through the massive pile of debris found a twisted piece of metal that cracked the case wide open. It was the rear axle of a Ryder rental truck, and, miraculously, the vehicle identification number was still readable. Investigators traced that number back to a rental shop in Junction City, Kansas. The shop owner told the FBI that a man using the name Robert Kling had rented the truck just 2 days earlier on April 17, 1995. Agents quickly built a composite sketch and showed it around town, eventually tracking the suspect to a local motel where he had used his real name, Timothy McVeigh. He was a 27-year-old Gulf War veteran who harbored extreme anti-government views. He specifically chose the date of the bombing to mark exactly 2 years since the 1993 federal raid in Waco, Texas, seeking violent revenge against federal law enforcement. When the FBI put out a nationwide alert for McVeigh, they got a stunning update. He was already in custody. Just 90 minutes after the bombing, a sharp-eyed Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper named Charles Hanger had pulled over a yellow Mercury Marquis driving north on the interstate because it lacked a rear license plate. During the routine traffic stop, the trooper noticed a bulge under McVeigh's jacket. He was carrying a loaded firearm and was immediately arrested for weapons charges. He was sitting in a local county jail just a few hours away from being released on a minor bond when federal authorities realized they had the most wanted man in America right in their hands. The investigation revealed that McVeigh did not act alone. He had teamed up with Terry Nichols, an old Army buddy who shared his extreme ideology. Together, they purchased massive amounts of agricultural fertilizer and racing fuel, mixing it inside the cargo box of the rental truck to build a 4,800-pound explosive device. Another friend, Michael Fortier, knew all about the deadly plot and actually helped them case the federal building beforehand. Because of the intense public anger in Oklahoma, the federal trial was moved to Denver, Colorado, to ensure an impartial jury. On June 2, 1997, after hearing from over 130 witnesses, a jury found McVeigh guilty on all 11 federal counts, including conspiracy and using a weapon of mass destruction. A few days later, he was officially sentenced to death. Fortier, who fully cooperated with the government and testified against his former friends, received a 12-year prison sentence for failing to warn authorities about the impending attack. Unlike many federal inmates who spend decades fighting appeals, McVeigh eventually dropped his legal challenges and asked a judge to set an execution date. On June 11, 2001, he was put to death by lethal injection at a federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was 33 years old. His main accomplice, Terry Nichols, faced 2 separate trials. After a federal trial in 1997 resulted in a life sentence, he faced a state trial in 2004, where an Oklahoma judge handed him 161 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The swift arrest and thorough FBI investigation ensured that the men responsible for the worst act of homegrown terrorism in United States history faced ultimate justice. If you were looking for the most notorious organized crime boss of the modern era, you would not have to look any further than the gritty streets of South Boston. For decades, James Whitey Bulger ran the feared Winter Hill Gang with an iron fist. He built a massive criminal empire based on extortion, illegal gambling, and loan sharking. But what made his reign so shocking was not just the crimes he committed, it was the undeniable fact that he was secretly working hand in hand with the exact people who were supposed to put him behind bars. Starting in the mid-1970s, Bulger became a top-echelon informant for the FBI. He fed valuable underworld information to a corrupt federal agent named John Connolly, who used those inside tips to take down the rival Italian mafia. In exchange, the FBI essentially looked the other way while Bulger ran the streets of Boston. The corrupt partnership worked perfectly for years, but by late 1994, federal prosecutors who were outside the loop were finally building a massive racketeering case against him. Just days before a federal grand jury was set to formally indict him in December 1994, Agent Connolly tipped his old informants off. Realizing the net was finally closing, Bulger packed his bags, grabbed his girlfriend, Catherine Gregg, and vanished. The escape launched a global manhunt and became a massive public relations disaster for the FBI. The agency spent the next few years chasing ghost sightings all over the world, from Europe to South America. Recognizing they desperately needed public help to catch their own fugitive, the FBI officially added Whitey Bulger to the Elite 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list on August 19, 1999. They eventually placed a massive $2 million cash bounty on his head, making him one of the most sought-after men in American history, right alongside international terrorists and cartel bosses. The aging mobster managed to stay off the grid for 16 years. He lived quietly in a rent-controlled apartment building in Santa Monica, California, hiding in plain sight under the fake name Charles Gasco. He paid for everything in cash, took daily walks along the beach, and kept to himself. In the summer of 2011, the FBI realized they were focusing on the wrong person. They decided to launch a daytime media campaign focused entirely on his girlfriend, highlighting her distinct physical features and frequent visits to dental clinics and beauty salons. The television ads worked flawlessly. A woman living overseas recognized the couple from her time living in California and immediately called the federal tip line. On June 22, 2011, federal agents set a trap. They tricked Bulger into walking down to his apartment parking garage, where they surrounded him and took the 81-year-old fugitive into custody without a single shot being fired. When agents searched his apartment, they found over $800,000 in cash and 30 loaded firearms hidden right inside the walls. The capture finally forced him to face the justice system he manipulated for so long. In 2013, a federal jury found him guilty of massive racketeering charges and involvement in 11 murders. The judge handed down 2 consecutive life sentences. As for Agent Connolly, he did not just serve federal time. He was later transferred to a Florida state prison to serve a 40-year sentence for second-degree murder charges before being granted medical parole in February 2021. Bulger did not end his days peacefully. On October 30, 2018, shortly after being transferred to a high-security federal penitentiary in West Virginia, the 89-year-old former mob boss was attacked in his cell by other inmates and suffered fatal injuries. The man who lived by violence and betrayal ultimately met the exact same fate. Some crimes capture the attention of the nation, but others bring the entire world to a sudden stop. In the summer of 1997, a highly intelligent and dangerously charming fugitive went on a cross-country spree that ended on the front steps of a global fashion icon. The hunt for Andrew Cunanan remains one of the most intense federal investigations of the decade. The terrifying chain of events began in late April 1997. Cunanan was a 27-year-old who had spent years funding a lavish lifestyle by attaching himself to wealthy older men in California. But his life was unraveling, so he bought a one-way ticket to Minneapolis. On April 27, 1997, he took the life of his former friend Jeffrey Trail inside a local apartment. Just a few days later, on May 3, 1997, authorities found his second victim, an architect named David Madsen near a lake in rural Minnesota. Cunanan stole a vehicle from Madsen and drove down to Chicago. On May 4, 1997, he targeted a prominent real estate developer named Lee Miglin, leaving him deceased inside his own garage. He then stole a green Lexus from the Miglin estate and headed east. By May 9, 1997, he was in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, where he took the life of a cemetery caretaker named William Reese, simply to steal his red pickup truck. Within a matter of weeks, Cunanan had crossed multiple state lines and left 4 victims behind. Local police departments were completely overwhelmed, so federal authorities stepped in to take control. On June 12, 1997, the FBI officially added Andrew Cunanan to the Elite 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. They launched a massive media blitz warning the public that he was a master of disguise who could blend into any high society crowd. They printed thousands of wanted posters and set up national hotlines, hoping for a break in the case. Despite the nationwide alert, fugitives slipped all the way down to South Florida and hid in plain sight. For 2 months, he stayed at a cheap hotel in Miami Beach, frequently walking around the city unrecognized. He even used his real name and personal details on a pawn shop receipt to sell a stolen gold coin, but the paperwork was not processed in time to alert the authorities. Then came the morning that shocked the world. On July 15, 1997, world-famous fashion designer Gianni Versace was returning to his oceanfront mansion after a quick morning walk to a local cafe. As Versace was unlocking his front gate, Cunanan walked up behind him and fired a weapon, inflicting fatal injuries. The murder of a global celebrity sent the media into an absolute frenzy. The FBI and local police effectively locked down the Miami area, launching a massive door-to-door search. They found the stolen red pickup truck parked in a nearby public garage, confirming Cunanan was the attacker. With nowhere left to run, The fugitive broke into a vacant houseboat docked along the water. On July 23, 1997, a caretaker checking on the boat heard a loud noise and called the police. Heavily armed SWAT teams surrounded the vessel and deployed tear gas. When they finally entered, they found Cunanan deceased inside a bedroom. He had taken his own life with the exact same weapon he used during his crime spree. While the FBI successfully closed the case, the true motive behind his sudden and violent rampage remains a mystery to this day. The FBI is the premier agency tasked with hunting down foreign spies operating on American soil. But in the late Cold War era, the Bureau faced a massive internal nightmare when they discovered an intelligence leak inside their own ranks. That nightmare was Richard W. Miller, who holds the dark distinction of being the first special agent in FBI history to be indicted and convicted for espionage. The timeline of this unprecedented security breach starts in the Los Angeles field office. By 1984, Miller had spent exactly 20 years working as an investigator for the Bureau and was assigned to the Soviet Foreign Counterintelligence Squad. Despite his highly sensitive security clearance, his personal life was a total disaster. He was facing severe financial ruin, dealing with a messy divorce, and struggling with a terrible performance record at work. His superiors even reprimanded him for losing his badge and credentials multiple times. His desperation made him the absolute perfect target for foreign intelligence operatives looking to exploit a vulnerable agent. During his assignment, Miller crossed paths with Svetlana Agorodnikov and her husband, Nikolai. Svetlana was a Russian immigrant who the FBI already knew was actively working as a KGB informant. Instead of investigating her, Miller started a romantic affair. Desperate to solve his endless financial problems, he made a treasonous deal. He agreed to hand over a highly classified FBI counterintelligence manual that detailed exactly how the United States tracked Russian spies across the country. In exchange for the secret documents, Svetlana promised to pay him $50,000 in gold and $15,000 in cash. Thankfully, the Bureau caught on to the plot before the damage could spread any further. The FBI placed their own agent under heavy surveillance and recorded his secret meetings. When confronted, Miller tried to claim he was secretly running a rogue double agent operation to salvage his failing career. Nobody bought his story. They were actually preparing to travel to Vienna, Austria, so Miller could personally meet with high-ranking KGB officials. But they never made it onto the flight. On October 2, 1984, agents moved in and arrested Miller along with the two Russian operatives. Svetlana and Nikolai both pleaded guilty to espionage charges in 1985, receiving prison sentences of 18 years and 8 years respectively. For Miller, what followed was a massive legal roller coaster that stretched across the rest of the decade. His initial federal trial in 1985 ended in a hung jury. Prosecutors took him back to court in 1986, where he was convicted and handed a 50-year prison sentence. However, an appeals court threw that conviction out in 1989 because the judge had improperly admitted polygraph test results during the trial. That decision set the stage for a final legal showdown in 1990. On October 9, 1990, federal prosecutors took him to trial for a third time. A jury found Miller guilty of espionage once again. A judge ultimately sentenced him to 20 years behind bars. After serving time in a federal penitentiary, his sentence was eventually reduced by a judge, and he was released in May 1994. He lived out his remaining years quietly out of the public eye and passed away in October 2013 at the age of 76. Millions of people travel from around the globe to celebrate the Summer Games, expecting a massive festival of peace and competition. But in the summer of 1996, the festivities in Atlanta, Georgia, were abruptly shattered by a devastating act of domestic terror. Late on the night of July 27, 1996, thousands of fans were enjoying a late concert at Centennial Olympic Park and celebrating the global event. Amidst the crowd, a security guard named Richard Jewell noticed a suspicious green backpack sitting unattended under a bench. Inside the bag were 3 pipe bombs packed heavily with masonry nails to maximize the damage. Jewell immediately alerted local law enforcement and heroically began rushing innocent people away from the area. Just minutes later, the device detonated. Despite the swift and brave evacuation efforts, 2 people lost their lives and over 100 others were severely injured by the blast. Initially, the media and the FBI wrongly zeroed in on Jewell, framing the hero as the prime suspect in a massive media frenzy. It took 88 grueling days and intense public scrutiny for the Bureau to finally and publicly clear his name. Meanwhile, the real perpetrator, Eric Rudolph, was busy plotting his next moves. A radical anti-government extremist, Rudolph went on to detonate 3 more explosive devices over the next 2 years. He targeted a clinic in Sandy Springs in early 1997, a lounge in Atlanta later that same year, and another clinic in Birmingham, Alabama in January 1998, causing an additional tragic loss of life and multiple injuries. Following the 1998 Birmingham attack, a sharp-eyed witness spotted his truck license plate as he fled the scene, finally giving the FBI a concrete name and a clear target. On May 5, 1998, they officially added Rudolph to the elite 10 most wanted fugitives list and offered a $1 million reward. But he vanished into the rugged Appalachian Mountains of western North Carolina. For 5 grueling years, he managed to evade a massive federal task force. He survived off the grid by hiding inside deep cave systems, foraging for acorns, and raiding local cabins under the cover of darkness to steal basic supplies. The massive multi-million-dollar manhunt finally ended in the most ordinary and anticlimactic way possible. On May 31, 2003, a rookie police officer named Jeffrey Postel was patrolling behind a grocery store in the quiet mountain town of Murphy, North Carolina. He spotted a man digging through a commercial dumpster at 4 in the morning. Believing it was just a local vagrant trespassing on the property, the officer made a routine arrest, only to quickly realize he had just captured one of the most wanted fugitives in America. To avoid the death penalty, Rudolph struck a plea deal in April 2005. He confessed to all 4 attacks and led federal agents to a massive stash of volatile explosives buried deep in the North Carolina woods, effectively neutralizing any lingering threat to the public. A judge officially handed him 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The 1996 mastermind remains locked away today behind the concrete walls of the federal Supermax prison. When a member of the law enforcement community becomes a victim, the entire agency feels the shock. This was certainly the case in August 1999, when the Wilmington FBI field office in North Carolina lost one of their own. Melissa Mooney was a 28-year-old administrative officer who was just beginning a new chapter in her life. She had recently purchased a home in the Apple Valley subdivision and was looking forward to moving day. But on the morning she was supposed to start work in her new office, she never arrived. Concerned by her absence, 2 of her co-workers drove to her new house to check on her. Upon arrival, they noticed the front door had been forced open. They entered the home and made a devastating discovery. Melissa had been murdered inside her own bedroom. Local police and federal agents launched an immediate and exhaustive investigation. The scene showed signs of a violent struggle, and the cord from her kitchen phone had been ripped from the wall. Investigators originally focused their efforts on her ex-husband because there had been a history of domestic problems during their marriage. They spent months vetting him, but the evidence cleared him completely. They also looked into other personal relationships she had, yet every single lead hit a dead end. For 2 years, the case remained cold, and the community lived in fear while the person responsible remained free. The major breakthrough finally arrived in 2001. A joint task force between local law enforcement and the FBI decided to restart the investigation with a fresh perspective. They began recanvassing the entire Apple Valley neighborhood and questioning every single resident. During this process, they identified a man named Tyrone Delgado who lived nearby. While interviewing suspects, investigators discovered a small and critical piece of evidence. A tiny body hair fragment was recovered from the mattress in the bedroom where Melissa was found. Because the sample was so small, technicians had to use specialized mitochondrial DNA testing. When they compared the sample to Delgado, it was a direct match. The breakthrough allowed prosecutors to link him directly to the scene of the crime. In 2008, the case finally went to trial. The jury heard all the evidence, including the DNA findings that placed Delgado inside the home. After a lengthy legal process, they found him guilty of first-degree burglary and first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to prison for his crimes, bringing a final sense of justice to the family and friends who had waited nearly a decade for answers. In the mid-1990s, the concept of digital crime was barely on the radar for most Americans. While the public worried about physical break-ins, One man was exploiting the backbone of the entire national communications system from his computer. His name was Kevin Mitnick, and for a short period, he was the most wanted cyber fugitive on the planet. Mitnick was not a typical criminal. He spent his time hacking into the systems of major corporations like Motorola, Sun Microsystems, and Pacific Bell. He stole proprietary software and cloned cellular phones just to prove he could bypass high-level security. To the FBI, he was not just a prankster. He was a dangerous threat to national infrastructure who moved between states to evade detection. The intense manhunt culminated on February 15, 1995, in Raleigh, North Carolina. The breakthrough did not come from a traditional police raid, but from a brilliant security expert named Tsutomu Shimomura. After Mitnick hacked into Shimomura's own computer, the expert dedicated his life to tracking him down. Shimomura traced digital breadcrumbs across multiple networks, eventually pinpointing Mitnick's exact apartment location. FBI agents moved in and arrested him in a swift operation, seizing various computer equipment and cloned phones. The legal fallout was significant. Mitnick pleaded guilty to multiple charges involving wire fraud and unauthorized access to federal computers. He spent 5 years in federal prison, which included a long period in solitary confinement. After his release in 2000, he made a massive turnaround. He utilized his deep knowledge of system weaknesses to become a paid security consultant, teaching companies how to defend themselves against people like his younger self. Mitnick lived a productive life in his later years, often speaking at conferences about the importance of digital privacy. He eventually passed away on July 16, 2023, due to complications from pancreatic cancer. While the early days of his career sparked fear across the tech industry, his later work helped shape modern cybersecurity. The era of the lone wolf hacker he embodied ended long ago, but his name remains cemented in history as the individual who forced the United States government to finally take cybersecurity seriously.